kicked to the curb. My family disowned me for being gay. They never want to see me again. Until I changed my mind. My name is Zayden, and my life changed drastically one cold December night. I remember the day vividly. The air was crisp, and the snow fell gently outside, creating a serene contrast to the chaos that would soon erupt inside my family's home. I had always known I was different, but it wasn't until I was 19 that I found the courage to admit it to myself. I was gay. I grew up in a conservative family in the heart of Iowa, where any deviation from the norm was not just frowned upon, but outright condemned. My parents, Gerald and Eleanor, were devout Christians who believed in traditional values, and my siblings, Thaddeus and Eloise, shared their beliefs. It was during our annual Christmas dinner that I decided to come out. I couldn't bear the weight of my secret any longer. I waited until we were all seated around the table, the smell of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes filling the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I cleared my throat, garnering everyone's attention. "I have something to tell you all," I began, my voice trembling. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "I'm gay!" For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then, all hell broke loose. "You are what?" my father bellowed, his face turning crimson. "How dare you bring this filth into our home on Christmas?" My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "Zayden, no. Tell me this is a joke," she pleaded, her eyes wide with horror. Thaddeus, my older brother, shook his head in disgust. "I always knew there was something wrong with you," he sneered. Eloise, my younger sister, just sat there, tears streaming down her face. I tried to explain, to make them understand that this was who I was, but they wouldn't listen. The argument escalated quickly, with my father shouting obscenities and my mother sobbing uncontrollably. Thaddeus threatened to beat the sin out of me, while Eloise just cried. Finally, my father's voice boomed over the chaos. "Get out," he said, his voice cold and final. "You're no son of mine." I was stunned. I had expected anger, but not this level of outright rejection. "Dad, please," I begged, but he was unwavering. "Get out," he repeated, pointing to the door. With tears in my eyes and my heart shattered, I grabbed my coat and walked out into the freezing night. As I trudged through the snow, I realized I was truly alone. My family had disowned me, and I had nowhere to go. The first few weeks after being kicked out were a blur. I crashed on friends' couches when I could, but I didn't want to impose on them for too long. Eventually, I found myself staying at a shelter. It was a harsh reality, but I had to survive somehow. I got a job at a local diner, working long hours for minimum wage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to get by. I met a lot of interesting people at the diner, some of whom became like a second family to me. One of them was a waitress named Lorene, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a heart of gold. She took me under her wing and helped me navigate my new life. Despite the support I found at the diner, the pain of my family's rejection never left me. Every night, I would lie awake, replaying the events of that fateful Christmas dinner. I couldn't understand how my family could turn their backs on me so easily. I missed them terribly, but I knew I couldn't go back. One day, as I was finishing my shift, Lorene approached me. "You've got a visitor," she said, nodding towards the front of the diner. I turned and saw Eloise standing there, looking nervous. "Zayden," she said softly when I walked over to her. "Can we talk?" I was hesitant, but nodded. We sat in a booth, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have stood up for you. I've missed you so much." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "I've missed you too, Eloise," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "But why are you here?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and I wanted to tell you that things at home haven't been the same since you left. Mom and Dad don't talk about you, but I know they regret what happened. Thaddeus is still, well, Thaddeus, but I think they miss you, even if they won't admit it." Her words were a balm to my wounded heart. "Do you think they'd ever forgive me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eloise reached across the table and took my hand. I don't know, she admitted, but I think you should come back and try. They need to see that you're still their son, no matter what. It took a lot of convincing from Eloise and a lot of soul-searching on my part, but I finally decided to go back home. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I didn't know what to expect or if my family would even let me in the door, but I had to try. Eloise picked me up from the diner one Sunday afternoon, and we drove in silence to our childhood home. As we pulled into the driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. The house looked the same, but it felt different. It no longer felt like home. Eloise squeezed my hand before we got out of the car. "No matter what happens, I'm here for you," she said, giving me a reassuring smile. We walked up to the front door, and Eloise knocked. A few moments later, my mother opened the door. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me standing there. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "can we talk?" She stood there for a moment, her eyes welling up with tears. Then, without a word, she stepped aside to let us in. My father was sitting in his armchair in the living room, and he looked up in surprise when he saw me. "What is he doing here?" he demanded, his voice harsh. "Gerald, please," my mother said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "Let's hear him out." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I began. "I just want to talk. I miss you all so much, and I'm hoping we can find a way to move forward." My father's face was a mask of anger and pain. "You betrayed us, Zayden," he said, his voice shaking. "You brought shame to this family." "I know," I said, my voice breaking, "but I'm still your son. I didn't choose to be gay. It's just who I am, and I need you to understand that." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, my mother stepped forward and pulled me into a hug, sobbing into my shoulder. "Oh, Zayden," she cried, "I've missed you so much." My father stood up, his face softening slightly. "We've all missed you," he admitted, his voice gruff. "But it's going to take time. We need to figure this out together." Thaddeus, who had been standing in the doorway, shook his head in disgust and walked away. But for the first time, I didn't care. I had my mother and father back, and that was enough. The next few months were a roller coaster of emotions. Moving back home was awkward and uncomfortable at times, but it was also a chance to rebuild my relationship with my parents. We had long, painful conversations about my sexuality, their beliefs, and the rift that had formed between us. My father struggled the most. He had always been a man of strong convictions, and accepting that his son was gay was a huge challenge for him. We had many heated arguments, but slowly, we began to understand each other better. He didn't agree with my lifestyle, but he was trying to accept me for who I was. My mother was more supportive. She had always been the heart of our family, and she worked tirelessly to mend the broken bonds. She even attended a support group for parents of LGBTQ+ children, which helped her understand my perspective better. Eloise was my rock through all of this. She defended me when things got tough and was always there to offer a shoulder to cry on. We grew closer than ever, and I was grateful to have her in my corner. Thaddeus, on the other hand, remained distant. He barely spoke to me and made it clear that he didn't approve of my presence. It hurt, but I knew I couldn't force him to change his views. All I could do was hope that time would soften his heart. One evening, as we were sitting around the dinner table, my father cleared his throat. "Zayden," he said, looking me in the eye, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you didn't choose this, and I'm sorry for how I reacted. I'm trying to understand, but it's hard." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot to me. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As time passed, things slowly began to improve. My father and I continued to work on our relationship, and my mother's unwavering support helped bridge the gap between us. I even found a new job, one that allowed me to move out of the shelter and into my own apartment. Thaddeus remained a challenge. He refused to engage with me and often made snide comments about my lifestyle. But I was determined not to let his negativity bring me down. I had come too far to let anyone, even my own brother, derail my progress. One day, Eloise called me with surprising news. "Thaddeus wants to talk to you," she said, her voice cautious. "He said he's ready to have a conversation." I was stunned. "Are you serious?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," she said, "but be careful. He's still Thaddeus."